the first thing that you think about when I say South Africa? Maybe Nelson Mandela? Perhaps apartheid? You can't really talk about South Africa now without considering its distinct history. A nation born out of a struggle for freedom, equality, expression, and liberation. The story of apartheid is one that is woven into the story of South Africa, its resilience and its contribution to the world. It's one that we will never forget, one that is intrinsically tied into the lives of South Africans today. A history of perseverance that bore a nation of endurance, rich in heritage. After the better part of 50 years of white supremacy ruling, today the nation of South Africa is one of incredible diversity, dynamism, and cultural expression, alive with possibilities despite our difficulties. Our freedom was bought with the lives of many struggle heroes. Our story, one that will continue to be locked into our hearts and expressly and tangibly expressed onto our landscape. After decades of repression and strife, the dawning of our democracy heralded a rich profusion of policies and interventions which attempted to encapsulate our new societal order. Architecture is a great vehicle for tracing this historical development of any country. And South Africa's architectural history, bound to the socio-political aspirations of its multi-ethnic inhabitants, transformed after our democracy to ensure that we captured our narrative and retained it. Along the way, heroes were celebrated, moments were marked, and movements honored. A tangible reminder of the wrongs never to be repeated and the lessons and visions of our hopes for our future generations. But history and heritage is more than just the story of where we've come from, fought to be memorialized and contained as a story of where we are going. It is also the fundamental informant of the story of now. The Group Areas Act of 1950 meant that now, 68 years later, in addition to the challenges faced globally, South African cities have the added abrasive scar of historical apartheid separatist planning, which created a fragmented city characterized by sprawl, spatial exclusion, and a poor mobility infrastructure. Here, the endurance of the people, the large majority of which are placed furthest from opportunity, have not been translated into a rich canvas. Whilst the effects of specific moments in our history can be quite accurately attributed to the social, political, and economic impacts on the country, the resultant environmental factors seem to be disembodied from the discourse. In Noordgesig, a small community marginalized in Johannesburg, their story of the now is one of a forgotten narrative and a lost identity. Once key contributors to the liberation struggle, this community now lies unnoticed and uncelebrated, in a stark, anonymous, lacking in appeal, and seemingly unactivated setting. In an attempt to restitch this fragmentation of communities such as this and others, current spatial models are seeking to revitalize the urban landscape through the creation of compact cities, using conceptual frameworks of nodes and development corridors to create densification and development infill. In Johannesburg, the Corridors of Freedom initiative was a stimulating spatial vision for the city, in line with the Growth and Development Strategy 2040. Based on transit-oriented development principles, it sought to restitch this fragmentation using well-planned transport arteries linked to interchanges that focused on multi-use development. Within the separated and even burgeoning urban fabric, this solution sought to bring the city closer to its spatial, social, and economic goals. The introduction of new policies to address a broader, intangible heritage consciousness meant that after years of neglect, Noordgesig would finally be heard. but how much of our policies are translated in an effective, self-sustaining, and successful manner, rather than just leaving redundant marks on our landscape. And development corridors not being a new idea to the urban planning and strategy conversation, how relevant and how contextual can these principles be applied to the South African environment? We began our journey of releasing this community from its shadows in 2015 with adopting a singular concept in terms of defining, unpacking, and unearthing this development. A strong concept of co-production that would tie the politics and the physicality of our urban development pursuits. The concept of a human narrative, the indispensable component of our heritage and the telling of our tales. In addressing heritage as narrative and a fundamental informant of the story of now, we need to go beyond just architecture. We need to consider the in-between and tactile influences as we seek to produce cities that are effective, self-sustainable, and responsive urban environments. We need to focus on cities that are co-produce places of destination designed with social dynamics at its core, that are responsive, using collaborative design tools to optimize the urban potential through participatory processes, that are cities within which communities are allowed to express creativity and identity, wherein communities are empowered to make choices around their spaces, thereby lending a citizen stamp to urban development and standing as ambassadors for their neighborhoods. For the most tangible and the most powerful part of our history and our heritage lies in the stories and the narrations of its people. The situation was dire when we arrived in Noordgesig. Visible signs of an unhealthy neighborhood greeted one at every corner. A lack of pride, a lack of accountability, public space as a scene for social ills. All symptoms of a community wherein citizen is separated from their physical environment. Symptoms indicating to us a lack of ownership, a disconnection, and a perpetuation of the environmental degradation. A forgotten history of freedom fighters and social drivers. A forgotten history of a dynamic community with incredible values on family and unity. A community with a legacy of strong artistic and cultural expressions, who recognize the value of relationships and stand together both in adversity and joy. A community who is active, creative, and expressive. A community that now is left anonymous and unheard. And so we began our process of co-creation with a newly informed and revitalized identity. The team appointed to translate the design extracted from the core of this community included more than just architects and urban designers, but more importantly, community participation consultants, community social strategists, and heritage consultants. From the very beginning, the history and the heritage of Noordgesig and its people was placed at the heart of our discussions and engagements. Beyond memorialization, there was no monument to build here, just contributions to amplify. There was no need for a museum filled with artifacts, just a plea for places of meaning. Extracting a design from the core of the community within which it is situated allows us to support and strengthen communities in need. By creating places of meaning, places that are reflective of the culture within which it's absorbed, places that are user-centric and uniquely contextual to its social environment. Including heritage as a central narrative and reflection of the community allowed us to co-produce a precinct plan for the area informed by the identity of the very users of the space. Through our engagements, we learned about the importance of community gathering and exchange, the innate sense of togetherness and spirit that resonated in the way its people historically rallied together in the fight for freedom. We learned the importance of the school and its role in sheltering high school students during the 1976 student protests, where students were shot at by apartheid police. We found meaning in the expression for a social space that allows knowledge to be exchanged and shared and elevated upon. And in so doing, we identified the need to develop a new iconic library and a community center and social cluster that would continue the social strategy of inclusion. We learned about the power of strength in numbers when heritage was spoken about as a collective and a unified voice. We discovered the importance of designing a strong, activated public space to create a platform for the conversation to continue. We learned about notable figures emanating from the community and the role that sport played as a medium of expression for development, peace, and social cohesion. And we recognized specific locations and individuals who contributed to this, thereby reminding the city and the public of a forgotten story and advancing on a heritage route that re-emphasizes the importance of sport in areas of need as a catalyst for social change. We supported these acknowledgements with Jane Jacobs-inspired walks, allowing the heritage to not only be revitalized and reactivated, but also reinterpreted and remembered as a connection to the broader city and its citizens. We then embellished the larger urban development project with functional art as placemaking, using elements of stories of heritage and history as told by the community to create an additional layer of activated narrative. Art as placemaking in the form of murals that carry a story. Art in the form of urban furniture that creates place resonating with the spirit of the community. Today, Noordgesig is a few months away from redefining its story of now as an acknowledgement of where it has come from and towards a vision for its future leaders and change makers. A first in Johannesburg, it is an animated lesson in the importance of translating the layers of our identity into our lived reality as a contextually rooted model for a truly livable, reflective, and responsive city. In creating cities for people, we need to go beyond developing spaces that facilitate the accommodation of certain amenities. And we need to immerse ourselves into the intricate layers of its social context and its social environment. Towards humane cities, we need to create design that matters. Nelson Mandela once said, "Our rich and varied cultural heritage has a profound power to build our nation. How we build that nation will be told as the story of what we do now." Thank you.